Hey, KU fans, welcome back to KU Sports Extra here at KUsports.com with Benton Smith, Benton Brackets Smith.
Wow. No one calls me that, but and they probably won't either. If anyone has ever seen my bracket, like after I filled it out, they'd be like, that's the last guy I want advice from.
This is a good point. I can vouch for that. And I can also tell everybody that usually the saddest part about that statement is that you usually take longer than anyone I've ever known to fill out your bracket too.
Exactly. So. Yeah. I mean, I'm still riding high on that money I won in 2000 by really investing a lot of time in my research. So, I mean, once you get that sweet cash from putting in the hard work, research and looking at all these numbers and plugging in things, you got to keep going back to it just in case.
Yeah,
right?
It's a tried and true method, obviously.
Yeah.
It works 1 out of every 20 times.
Exactly. I'm 2, baby.
There you go. Well, obviously, we're here to talk mostly about Kansas tonight, but we'll talk a little bracket as well. The Jayhawks make it into the tournament as a number 3 seed, and they will take on Eastern Washington on Saturday. At time of this recording, we don't know exactly what time, and we don't know where even. We know it's up there in Indiana somewhere. But
somewhere in that general area of the map.
Right. Which one of the venues will get KU's first game, we don't know yet, but we should very soon. It'll be on the site, of course. But, yeah, I mean, it's you looked at Eastern Washington a little bit. I did as well. Don't know too much about them yet. We'll learn a little more in the next couple of days. But overall, the draw, 3rd seed in the West with Gonzaga. What'd you think when you first thought that? I mean, obviously, even Self said 15 other teams in this region are like, oh, great. Here's our bracket.
Exactly.
We got Gonzaga. And I guess the one thing that jumped out at me is that, okay, well, they did that region first, too, when the selection show aired the bracket. And, they weren't the 4 and they weren't the 5. So at that point, if you're playing Gonzaga, you're playing Gonzaga to go to the Final Four. I don't know a person alive that's a KU fan that would argue with that right now. So as much as it's a bad break, it's also not the worst it could have been, because they could have been a 4 and been in Gonzaga's region. So, I'm sure that jumped out to you as well. What else jumped out when you just saw Kansas in that 3 spot in the West?
Well, I mean, honestly, the first thing that jumped out to me is I was just, how your brain starts working before the brackets come out, like in the days leading up to it. And you're like, I wonder if this seed line will be correct, or who might KU be playing, because that's what we cover and that's what we're probably most concerned about. But I was actually just thinking the other day, boy, I don't know that KU wants to see USC, and there was USC.
Look at you
above KU.
The good news for KU fans is you're terrible at brackets, so it's not going to matter.
Yeah. USC will lose to Drake or something. So.
Yeah. Have you seen them? I mean, I know they won the Pac-12, right? But I mean,
no, they did not win the Pac-12.
Well, there you go. I don't know that.
Yeah. That was Oregon State, right?
I'm sorry, regular season.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about the other night with the conference tournaments.
Sure, right.
Yeah, I mean, they're just like insanely long on that front line. They've got athletes and I don't know. To me, it kind of reminded me a little bit of that Texas team that KU has had major issues with, just because of that, the athleticism and length especially. So that was kind of my thinking. So that was the first thing that jumped out to me when I saw that.
Yeah, it's fair. I'm sure a lot of people saw that as well. It's weird because Self said this, and he said this 100 times. I mean, it really is all about matchups. It doesn't matter if that's 3-6. It doesn't matter if it's 4-8. It doesn't, none of that matters. I mean, it's the matchup thing that is so important in this tournament. And I think that's the most perfect example of that, because generally speaking, I think the Pac-12 was trash this year. Right? You wouldn't necessarily on paper
of champions.
You wouldn't necessarily on paper be scared of the team that won the Pac-12. Yeah. But there you go. You look a little deeper, you peel back some layers, and you say, oh, well, the length is there. Yeah. So I think that's a good example of what he means by matchups, because, the Big Ten and Big 12, by far the 2 best conferences in college basketball this year. They got 16 teams in combined, and the Pac-12 just not impressive. I mean, really. I mean, look at Oregon State, like you said, winning the Pac-12 tournament and stealing a bid. They weren't getting in, but they steal a bid. I don't know who they stole it from. Maybe Louisville, I guess, is
maybe.
Colorado State, Ole Miss, some of those teams. But they didn't steal it from Wichita State, which was also revealed early in the bracket. And I thought that was pretty good news for the Shockers, obviously. So you've got Kansas in the West. You've got, as we mentioned, Gonzaga. Benton's all over the USC thing. But you've got Iowa. You've got KU as the 3. You've got Virginia as the 4, the 2 COVID teams. They call it the COVID bracket. And then Creighton is the 5th seed, and then USC 6. Oklahoma's the 8. I mean, you know, we'll get to the Big 12 in a little bit, but what else about that jumped out at you? Because I'll be honest, I think Iowa's a good team. They're in a great conference. They've got a great player. But I think Iowa as your 2 is not the worst thing ever. I think that would be something that KU, if they play Iowa, would be, you know, very, very welcome. Or they would. That's something they would welcome. I think. I mean, you know, it doesn't mean they win, but it's a decent matchup for Kansas. Whereas some of the other ones aren't. Did you feel that way? Have you seen Iowa much? I mean, I've seen a lot of Big Ten. I like the conference, but Iowa's, you know, up and down.
Yeah, but I mean, they obviously have one of the most effective offensive players in the country, Luka Garza. So it'd be fun to watch David McCormick. You know, assuming he's back to 100%, and that if that matchup happened to be in the Sweet 16, so that'd be kind of pretty far removed from when McCormick had to sit out. So you'd assume he'd kind of be back in a groove by then. That'd be a really fun matchup, just individual wise. And probably be the biggest draw of that game. And honestly, it would probably come down to those 2. You know, can KU and McCormick do anything to stop Garza?
Yeah,
Garza will shoot from outside too, so he's not like a one-trick old school pony just inside playing on the block exclusively.
That's what I was going to say. Like, you know, Caleb Swanigan from Purdue a couple years back, right? Swanigan could shoot from outside as well and was comfortable, not as comfortable as Garza, but he was, but still he was such a load inside. And then, you know, that was a really good Kansas team that beat that Purdue team by was it 3,000 or something? But yeah, I mean, you know, that kind of comes to mind because Self's had plenty of examples of that where the other team has a horse and he gets a little bit of time to think about how to slow him down. And again, yeah, the McCormick Garza matchup would be fantastic and fun, but KU also has Marcus Garrett, and there's no doubt that he would factor into how Garza does and plays and fares in that game. So we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's what you do, and this is what you wrote about. I mean, this is exactly what your column was from Selection Sunday.
Don't do this.
Right, but we can do it. KU shouldn't do it, but we can do it. You know, and I think what you wrote was perfect because there is the tendency, especially when you're Kansas, to look and start mapping out your road to the Final Four and all that stuff. But KU's got plenty on its plate to worry about without even worrying about the matchups. You just play the team that you're matched up with, play the game, and see how you do. Play as well as you can. You might advance. So I thought that was a good take by you for sure because normally it's a 1 seed or a 2 seed, right? And that's how you do it. This is kind of the tradition around Kansas. But this year, I'm going to look the rest of the week, and I'm going to spend a lot of time looking, and I'm not going to look at individual, you know, my aunt's cousin's uncle's dog or anything. But I think, you know, nationally, I'm going to keep a close eye out for if anyone picks Kansas to go to the Final Four. I'm going to go on record saying it will not happen. I mean, there may be some in brackets, like I said, individual people, but none of the people that get paid to do it are going to pick Kansas. I mean, Self even said that. How do you not pick Gonzaga? And I mean, he's not betting against his team, but he's basically saying like, hey, there aren't going to be very many brackets that don't have the Zags in the Final Four. So it will be interesting, but let's get into the other things that KU has to worry about. We don't, but I mean, I guess in a roundabout way we do since we have to cover it, but they will be shorthanded, but not nearly as shorthanded as it sounded like could be possible. I mean, it sounds like McCormick and Enaruna will be back, and they're not traveling up there when the team does on Monday, but you know, that's where the benefit of playing Saturday comes in handy. You get up there Wednesday or Thursday, you still get a couple of days to be back around your team and go over scouting reports and things like that. So that's huge. And then the third player who tested positive for COVID-19 on Friday, I mean, it sounds like a given or a guarantee that he will miss the first 2 games if KU continues to advance. So at that point, you're talking about getting a player back for the Sweet 16 that you don't have for the first 2 rounds. Could be a lift, could be devastating in the first 2 rounds, and it may not matter. So that's something they've got to worry about. But what'd you make of Self talking about Tyon Grant Foster? I mean, it was the question was just, hey, is anybody going to step up? Do you look for somebody to step up? And normally, and even last week before the Big 12 tournament, because McCormick and Enaruna ruled out before the Big 12, so he was asked that same question then, who do you want to step up? And he basically said, I want everybody to step up. Tonight, he kind of said the opposite. I mean, he said, but he went right to Tyon Grant Foster. You think it was a confidence move? Do you think it was a call-out move, like a challenge him? I mean, or do you think it's just facts? He thinks Tyon Grant Foster needs to step up and they need him to make a run.
Well, yeah, how did he word it? Right, it was like he'll be given every opportunity to
be an impact player.
Yeah, to be an impact player in the the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. So to me, that's kind of where Self is at mentally right now, that well, we're down another rotation player, even if we are hopefully, and it seems like likely, bringing back McCormick and Enaruna.
Right,
Enaruna's a guy that, I mean, basically you haven't trusted in a while anyway. So maybe Self's seeing some things from Grant Foster during practices that has him a little bit intrigued about the possibility of inserting him into that 8 or 9 spot in the rotation, and maybe give him a little opportunity against Eastern Washington to see what he can do and build upon that. But it's no matter what, I mean, you're in a kind of a rough spot if you're at this point of the season looking to some guy who you basically have been not playing for the past several weeks just because he's not in the mix in your rotation.
Yeah, I mean, he last played 2 minutes against K-State on February 17th. But they've said all year that his attitude's been great, and he's obviously had some moments. I mean, he's had some really good moments, a couple of games where his play certainly determined the outcome of the game. And I think back to maybe it was in December, late December, when Self talked about Enaruna and Grant Foster as potentially 2 of the better players come February. But it didn't happen that way. I mean, and I don't think he was blowing smoke, and I don't think he was, hoping to light a fire or anything. I think he thought that if they worked hard and figured it out, they could be, because there's a lot to like about both of those guys. Their length, their athleticism, they can play inside and outside. Tyon's not had the best luck shooting from the outside this season. In fact, almost no luck, but he, his shot looks good, and we've seen him make shots. So it's interesting to me that he was kind of on that track with those guys, and it just never materialized. And so it goes, right? I mean, that happens with teams all over the place. Doesn't mean Self whiffed. Doesn't mean those guys couldn't still be a factor in the postseason. And seasons that really didn't mean much, they play 2 or 3 good games in the tournament. All of a sudden, they'll be remembered forever as a big part of a pretty good team. So it'll be really interesting, because I'm sure the confidence has wavered a little bit. I mean, when you don't play, you don't get opportunities to get comfortable. You don't get opportunities to show what you can do. And it's impossible probably for you to feel too good about yourself going into that type of moment. But at the same time, you are going up against those guys in practice. And I'm sure you're having your moments where you're, Tyon Grant Foster's probably put one on Jalen Wilson, or put one on Ochai, or drove by Christian Brown a time or two and had, the last laugh type of thing. So there could be some confidence there sort of under the surface, and maybe all he needs is an opportunity. So I thought that was really interesting, though, that Self just pointed him out almost unsolicited. And so it does tell you what they're looking for, maybe a breakout type player. I think Bryce Thompson's got a chance to be a breakout type player.
Right.
He's been back in the rotation since he came back from injury, and he's been very good in terms of the way he competes and the way they can count on him to play his minutes. I think if he could figure out his offense in the tournament and some of those shots start to fall, I mean, that's where he goes to the next level and could really impact the game. I mean, if he could find a way to score 10 or 12 points a game while continuing to do all the other things he does, I mean, that would be a major lift. I'm not predicting it by any means, but it would be a major lift. And he's out there enough to get that opportunity. It's just a matter of seeing the ball go in. So, I mean, anybody else jump out at you? I mean, this is a team that's sort of separated itself from the, the contributors and the non-contributors. I mean, is there anyone else you could point to that might be that type of major factor kind of in waiting?
Well, I mean, The first guy that came to mind for me when you're talking about that is, Christian Brown. I mean, he's not been as productive as he possibly can be at times. Of late, I think it's usually he's around 10 or 11 points or something like that. But sometimes it dips below that, and but he's definitely a guy who can give you 15 to 18 on any given night. You just you get 3 or 4 3-pointers and some drives and a transition bucket, some free throws. You get those numbers pile up pretty quickly. So to me, he's a guy who's capable of doing that. And he's obviously so good defensively and on the boards that he's going to be playing the minutes to have a chance to make that type of contribution. So, I mean, some guys are going to have to step up because obviously they're going to be missing at least one key piece for 2 games at minimum.
Yeah. And like you said, we don't know what McCormick's wind will be like. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Dave's an interesting dude, and we've all seen this. We've seen it all year. Dave's the kind of guy to me that, he missed the Oklahoma game. They won without him, but I'm sure that bothered him. I'm sure he hated to, quote unquote, let his team down by not being out there, even if it wasn't his fault. And, he's one of those guys that I could see coming back and being so excited to sort of make up for it, right? And so, we've seen him start off games hot, and we've seen him start off games not hot. And usually when he starts off games not hot, it's been the result of him pressing and trying too hard, right?
Right.
So I wonder if that's sort of in the works here. I mean, this is a guy who just missed a game because of COVID or at least COVID protocol. And I could see him coming back and just wanting to be like, hey, I'm back. Let's do this. Watch me. And then, he gets too sped up, misses 4 shots to open a game. Then it gets in his head. And the next thing you know, oh, man, what's happening? He's got to sit or something like that. So,
yeah.
I'm not predicting that either. I mean, he could come back and be so locked in and thankful to be playing that he just kicks butt. I mean, that's possible too. So, again, here we go with as much as KU kind of calmed the waters and became a pretty good team and found its identity and obviously became a 3 seed. There's still that team that I think on any given night could beat anybody and on any given night could lose to anybody. And how many teams are like that in the bracket this year?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's any year you're going to have among those top 20 teams, you're going to have some teams that are oh man, on their best night, they're amazing.
Right.
But to me, I think you're right. I think and I think it's because, Gonzaga is obviously better than everybody. And then you have kind of that next tier down with Baylor and Illinois and those type of teams. But everybody beyond that, I think it's kind of a mixed bag. At their best, they look like they could make a run. And at their worst, they look like they could be done after 1 or 2 games. So I think KU's right in that same conversation.
They are. I think there's probably 25 teams that fit that description that you just said and that I was talking about. I mean, but the one thing about Kansas that's really interesting to me is that they have 8 losses. Everybody knows that. But those 8 losses to 7 teams are all NCAA tournament teams. We've talked about it all year. Not a bad loss on the resume. Well, they lost to 2 1 seeds. They lost twice to a 3 seed. They lost another game to a 3 seed. They lost to a 4 seed in Oklahoma State. They lost to an 8 seed. I mean, you start looking, and I did this a little bit, but you start looking at some of those other – I mean, even Iowa. Iowa lost to Indiana. Houston, who's a 2 seed, their losses were to Tulsa and I can't remember who else, but, not great losses, not tournament teams. So I don't know that means anything, but it makes me wonder if from that group that we just talked about, if maybe Kansas is a little more – consistent than we realize, a little more battle tested than we realize, because they're not losing to the UTEPs of the world. They tried, but they're not losing that game. They didn't lose one to K-State, that type of thing. So I don't know that that'll mean anything, but I wonder how that's playing for their confidence, because I thought it was great that Self pointed this out. There aren't too many teams that enter the tournament on a 2-game winning streak or better, because not everybody can win their conference tournament. And yet here KU is on a 2-game winning streak. Is it 2? Is that it? Seems like it should be more, doesn't it?
It is more. It's 3, right?
Yeah.
Because Baylor, UTEP, and then Oklahoma at the Big 12 tournament.
There you go. So,
right?
So yeah, so a streak. We'll call it
3.
a streak. Look out.
It's like they won a tournament.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know that means a whole lot. But this time of year, you look for any advantage you can find, and if that's one, I mean, Ohio State just lost to Illinois in a great Big Ten title game, but Ohio State's going into the tournament on a loss. Iowa, same thing. Who's the other team that's seated highly like that? Baylor, they just lost. So, I mean, it doesn't mean anything. Probably, again, it all is going to come back to matchups. But if you can find a way to convince your players that it means something, or maybe elevate their confidence and their sense of belonging and calm and poise and all those things through using those methods, nobody does that better than Bill Self. So he's probably in the lab right now working on all these little mind game buttons that he can push and try to figure out how to make these guys believe that not only should they get back to an Elite Eight game against Gonzaga, but that they can win it when they get there. If they get there, we'll talk a lot more about that. But we won't waste any time doing that just yet. But it would be a blast. You said it. You wrote it. I mean, sign me up. Marcus Garrett was asked about it tonight. Did you look at that in the bracket? He said, yeah, I mean, we would love that opportunity. And he said, I think it'd be a great game if we get there. So, of course it would, or it wouldn't. But right now it sounds good. So what else jumped out at the bracket overall? I mean, 7 teams from the Big 12 are in. I kind of thought that like Self said, Oklahoma as an 8 surprised me. Texas Tech as a 6 seemed a little low. They're scary as a 6. I wouldn't want to play them. I thought Oklahoma State as a 4 was a surprise too. They made such a run and they've been so hot. And there were people talking about them as a 2. What do you think of the Big 12's, I guess, outlook?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to start with Baylor, right? Because they've been the best team in the Big 12 this year, and it's interesting. I mean, obviously you're going to pencil them into the second round, but right after that they could face UNC or Wisconsin in that first weekend, and just that alone is that's got to be tough for Baylor, because as we know, they missed a huge chunk of February and they haven't quite looked like themselves since they came back. Now, I mean, obviously it's definitely possible they can recapture that, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people have them getting upset just because they haven't quite been at that old Baylor that looked, untouchable for the first couple months of the season.
Yeah. What are you going to do with them? You're going to pick them to advance? Do you know yet?
I better think about it and do some research for 3 days and let you know.
Okay.
No, I mean, I doubt I'll have Baylor in the Final Four. I will say that.
Yeah. I saw actually ESPN sent out their experts or analysts picks, and 2 of them had Baylor winning it all. Still.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't remember which 2. LaFonso Ellis might have been one.
Okay.
And I can't remember who else. Seth Greenberg, maybe? Seth Greenberg had Texas and Baylor in the Final Four. I did notice that, because all the KU fans think he hates the Big 12 and hates Kansas. He may hate Kansas, but he obviously doesn't hate Texas and Baylor if he picks them to the Final Four. So,
right.
And he may not hate anybody. I don't know. I don't care. But I don't know. I still think Baylor, gosh, man, I'm with you. Like, they're one of those teams that on their best night, they are the best team in the country, maybe. And I do wonder about that same thing. Gonzaga hasn't had any, or at least not recently, any COVID pauses or anything like that. But I mean, they do play in the West Coast Conference, right? And it's just something you have to consider, because that second game for them. I mean, if Oklahoma gets by Missouri, and Missouri's not where they were once earlier this season, so I like Oklahoma to win that game. But I mean, Oklahoma's going to go up against Gonzaga and believe they can win that game.
Yeah, I mean, just because that's the caliber program they are, that they expect to compete with anybody for sure. But yeah, obviously Gonzaga's got some dudes inside.
Right.
Suggs is so amazing. I mean, to me, there aren't a lot of 8 or 9 seeds that could beat Gonzaga. Now, I mean, now that I've said it, definitely they'll lose this coming weekend.
Perfect. Yeah, I was just looking. I'm over here on another page, but I was looking at the 8-9 games. Loyola Chicago against Georgia Tech. I mean, Loyola is a really good team. If they get by Georgia Tech, who's also red hot right now, then they have to play Illinois. I like Loyola. I think they could have made a run as a 6 or a 7 seed.
It's crazy, right? Because, I mean, what are they, like 9th in KenPom?
Right,
and,
right.
That stuff like that drives you nuts when you're trying to fill out a bracket.
I agree. I mean, so yeah, now you've got Loyola in the second round as an 8 if they advance, going up against Illinois. Yeah. I'm not picking very many teams to beat Illinois, if anybody.
Yeah,
So
I mean that's just like an outstanding game that shouldn't happen in the round of 32.
right, very true. The other one that's really interesting, and I don't know that Kansas fans have this on their radar at all, but Colgate, right? Colgate's the 14th seed, and in the net rankings, which everybody knows how big those are, in the net rankings, Colgate is ninth. Ninth, ahead of Kansas, ahead of
net rankings.
I mean,
you weirdos.
That's right. Like, I generally like the net. I really do. And I agree with most of the rest of it. But like, how did that happen? They've got 0 quadrant 1 games. I mean, now I'm not talking wins. I'm talking games. They have not played a quadrant 1 game. They are 11-1 against quadrant 3 and 4. I mean, I don't know how they're 9 here, because I believe they're probably closer to the 14 that they're seeded as. So that one just doesn't jive. And does it mean much? No. Who do they play? Arkansas. So, a 14-3 matchup. Arkansas is pretty darn good. They've been pretty hot toward the end of the season too. So, I just, that one jumped out at me as like, what happened there? So maybe that'll be one that ends up something weird happen and they have to tweak the net again, because it is still brand new pretty much. So maybe they have to tweak it again so that doesn't happen in the future, because even if they're not 9 in the net, right? Like, even if that's woefully wrong, just by ending up there, you'd think they'd be like at least a top 10 seed, 14.
Right.
So weird.
It's also, maybe it's thrown off by the weird year too, because looks like they're 14-1, so they obviously haven't played a normal schedule or anything close to it. So that must factor in some way. Yeah,
that's a great point, and I think that's something that we can kind of finish with here. This is great, man. Right? Like, do you remember? I know you do. Everybody does. Like, when last year's tournament got canceled, and everybody was sort of just reeling from. I mean, none of us really even knew how bad COVID was going to become. Mm-hmm. So we were really still trying to figure out how to deal with the loss of the tournament, not knowing what loss was coming for the world ahead. But man, I just remember, like, it was so depressing, right? And I remember, like, when Selection Sunday finally came, it's like people begging the NCAA, please just release the bracket. Like, we just want to look at it. Let's see what, right, exactly. And they chose not to. And, in hindsight, it probably was the right decision, because I don't know that anybody needed to debate it or argue it, like they do every year. But it's just wild to think about how that doesn't feel like that long ago. And then here we are looking at a bracket and getting ready for the start of a tournament. And I would imagine there are pretty good odds that this tournament's going to have something wonky happen in it, right? I mean, like, they have contingency plans. They have replacement teams at the ready. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope all 68 of these teams get to compete and earn, they earned their spot. So I hope they get to ride it out as long as they're in it. But I feel like it's probably somewhat inevitable that something weird's going to happen to somebody along the way. And I mean, you obviously hope it's not one of the big boys. It's a title contender or anything like that. But you really just hope it's not to anybody. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Do you agree? I mean, do you feel like some team's going to get yanked or something weird like that's going to happen? I mean, it seems like it's almost guaranteed. There are so many teams, and you're dealing with so many moving pieces. And I know they're trying to do a bubble type environment, but it's not going to be a true bubble. I'm sure it'll be rigid and tough, but I don't know. To me, if a team that's on the level of a Kansas or a Virginia can this late in the season run into issues with this, to me, it's just going to happen. Yeah. Some team is going to lose a major player, or just have to bow out because of this. So I mean, that's the last thing you want to see, like you just mentioned. But it just kind of seems like that's probably what's going to happen. Yeah, it'd be, I mean, if it has to happen, better early than late. You'd hate to see it, and I wonder, I haven't read this or heard this from the NCAA or anything, but like, if we get to the point where it's the Final Four, I mean, can they just delay it? Like, at that point, Do you really replace a team in the Final Four, or at that point, I guess it would probably be a forfeit. So the team they're supposed to play goes to the title game. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know they can't do all of it, right? There's just certain things they're going to have to live with, and we're all going to have to live with. But the cool thing is that Kansas appears to have, at least gotten to the point where they can head up there, and that they should have that 5-player minimum
That's all you need
to field a team. And I think we'll probably see some of that. I mean, 5's pretty small, so I think a lot of teams will have a handful of players, but you're going to see some walk-ons play. You're going to see some short benches. You're going to see some short rosters. I mean, you're going to see some guys that are horses on teams already be ridden even harder and have to maybe play 40 minutes. I mean, it's just it fits because it's been such a crazy year. But the bottom line is it's just damn good that it's here, and we get to cover basketball in March. We get to watch it. We get to fill out a bracket. Benton gets to take 7 hours on each game and really dive into it. So just take a good close look at that Kansas Eastern Washington game on Benton's bracket, because if he picks Eastern Washington, there's something behind that. Am I right?
Right. Lots of even more research going into this matchup. I will guarantee that.
Yeah, you're getting paid to do it.
Yeah, this is something I have to write about.
Any other thoughts, man? Anything else you want to say about the bracket before we wrap this up? We'll obviously have all kinds of coverage throughout the week leading up to Saturday's game. I will be in Indianapolis. It's a different way of covering this thing, but I'm going to go up there anyway and see what I can do and check it out from that perspective, as much just to be there and see it and document what it's like, because they will have some fans, but it will be a lot like the rest of the games you've seen this year. The good news is it will be nothing like the Kansas-Kentucky game that you saw in Indianapolis back in December, because there was no one in that building that night, and it won't be like that. There will be some NCAA tournament buzz and hype and feel. It won't be quite what it was, but that's the way this season's gone. Allen Fieldhouse wasn't quite like it was, but I guarantee you one thing: when KU beat Baylor in there a couple weeks back, it sounded like Allen Fieldhouse. They were fired up. It was loud. It was crazy. It was euphoric. I mean, so it will still feel like the tournament, and I'm really looking forward to just documenting what it does look and feel like, because I think that's as much of the interesting part of this as who wins and who loses and how the bracket breaks out. So any other things you're jumping out with or seeing on this bracket or in the world, maybe, if you want to get some current events off your mind?
No, you just mentioned that KU Kentucky game. It looks like KU will be back in that same venue based on what I was just looking at online. They played that at where the Pacers play, right?
Bankers Life. Yeah. Did you find that? Good. Good.
It's looks like it'll be Saturday at, well, this has got some conflicting times on CBS's or the NCAA site. One says 12:15 Eastern, one says 12:15 Central. Those are obviously two different times.
Either way, they're deadline times for us.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's good news. Great. All right. Well, good. So Bankers Life Fieldhouse, it says, though?
Oh, that's what it's called? Okay, no, it's not Bankers Life. It's
this guy.
It's another venue. I know. I don't know. The Pacers are always changing the name of their arena. I can't keep
What
up.
is it called?
Indiana Farmers Coliseum.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
In Indianapolis.
Okay. Well, Indianapolis, that's good.
Yeah.
I can stay at home base. I don't have to rent a car and drive to West Lafayette or anything like that. Weird. Well, okay. So sometime around noon.
The noon-ish hour.
Let's see. While we still have these people on the hook. Oh, were you looking at your email or what?
I was looking at the NCAA's website, just NCAA.com. Yeah.
Okay. So it's let's see, 1:15. Yeah, TBS 1:15, and that's Eastern. So 12:15 on Saturday on TBS from Farmers Coliseum, Eastern Washington versus Kansas. Brad Nessler, Steve Lavin, and Evan Washburn on the call. How about that? That's a freaking tournament right there, man. It's actually happening. 12:15 TBS Saturday afternoon. Central Time. How good is that? Well, good, man. This is great. Then we didn't know when we started rambling. I talked long enough, and
it out.
here we are.
You helped us.
Yeah, gosh, The internet, Al Gore, what a hero. Any final thoughts, man? Let's wrap it up. But anything else you want to add before it starts? You get to go on record one final time. If you want to be the guy, that says Colgate's going to win this thing, you got 20 seconds to do it.
No, I will stay away from making that type of prediction. But to me, it's always interesting when there's like a very intriguing, like potential second round matchup with KU. Like, I don't know, Wichita State.
Yeah.
So I always love to see if anything like that sneaks its way into the bracket, because it seems like at least every other year there's something kind of juicy like that.
That's a good call. Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, there was a lot of speculation that Missouri might be a 6 and KU could be a 3, and that was gonna happen. And so you saw Missouri right away when you were watching the selection show. So they didn't do that. But Wichita State, that's interesting. Creighton is also in the region. That's interesting. I mean, Virginia's the 4, right?
4, yeah.
So KU wouldn't have to play them till the Elite 8 if they both got there, and obviously Virginia would have to get by. So yeah, that one's intriguing to me too. I love that. I absolutely love that Virginia's the defending champs. It's the coolest thing. They didn't, there was no tournament last year. They won it in 2019. So they got more bang for their buck out of their title than almost any team in the history of college basketball has gotten. But I'm sure, just like Kansas, they're thrilled to be in it and preparing to play, because they had to pull out of the ACC tournament, and probably we're dealing with a lot of the same emotions that KU players and fans were as well. So maybe that will be what happens. Maybe it will be Kansas, Virginia in the Elite 8 in the COVID region. Who knows?
So fitting.
So fitting. Well, we'll have all kinds of coverage. We'll break down Eastern Washington a little better, a little closer. We'll talk about the matchup. We'll talk about Kansas. We'll update you on everything we can possibly update you on heading into Saturday's game. Again, 12:15 on TBS from Farmers Coliseum. It just rolls off the tongue. For Benton Smith, I'm Matt Tate. It's tournament time, everybody. Let's enjoy the heck out of it, because last year sucked. Thanks for checking out KU Sports Extra. We'll talk to you guys again real soon on another episode.